Excellent. I hope you can all hear me well. All right, I guess my voice has to be a little bit louder than what we're hearing from next door. I just want to say it's a great pleasure for me to be here today with all of you. A lot of friendly faces that we know we've been working with. And today's event is going to be focusing on what we've been doing together as development banks, the approach that we've been adopting to maximize financing for climate and health. In fact, this working group that we're going to be talking about today and the approach that we've come up with together is going to be the focus of today's discussion, which is going to be divided into two parts. The first part of the discussion is going to be focusing on really unpacking what is in the joint roadmap that the development banks have produced. And then the second part is going very specifically diving into co-financing opportunities that the development banks are working together on. So I just want to take a moment before jumping immediately into the panel discussion and asking our panelists here a few questions just to stimulate the discussion, to remind us all that, we've been hearing obviously about the health being at the face of the climate crisis. And I think once we talk about health being the face of the climate crisis, definitely many of us as health professionals, the first thing that comes to mind are all the impacts that we're seeing on infectious diseases, the impacts that we're seeing in terms of people's, let's say, lives and livelihoods. But at the same time, an important angle that we don't necessarily quite grasp all the time is the poverty angle that also is involved with the climate crisis, and how health is playing such a huge role in terms of potentially pushing nearly 44 million people into extreme poverty by 2030. Today is a day to celebrate. This is after 27 years, we're having, for the first time ever, a day that is dedicated to health at COP. That has been seriously a passion of all of us for such a long time, to be able to see this focus on health, to be able to bring health in the center of climate discussions and climate action. And today, we're celebrating that. But the celebration has to start with not just words, but actually commitments and actions that we would take together forward. So I want to perhaps say that, beyond the physical burden of the climate crisis, the physical burden of disease, and beyond the poverty angle, one of the main things that obviously is striking is that very little money, very little resources is going into climate and health action. And this was the reason why we had established the Development Bank's Working Group for Climate and Health Finance, which, by the way, is not just the multilateral development banks. So despite the fact that we're in the multilateral development bank pavilion, but this is very much also a public development bank's agenda, and also the private sector. So we are bringing these partners around the table to talk about this joint approach, to talk about the roadmap, and also to discuss co-investment framework that we're putting together for that. So I want to start off at the beginning by just a quick reminder to everyone with the objectives of this Development Bank's Working Group and what we have been oops, sorry. Okay, so I'm not able to get the PowerPoint to work. Here we go. I need the first slide, yeah? So I just want to perhaps to focus the attention on what the objectives, so the objectives of the Development Bank's Working Group are. And this is just really a very quick outline of why we came together. The first point really was to elevate the political sort of profile for climate and health, and ensuring that, again, health becomes a part of the climate discussions and dialogue when it comes to climate and health action, and elevating, if you will, the health as part of the investment priority for climate action. The second is to ensure that we all come together to be able to mobilize financial resources and to commit those resources to support climate action, both from an adaptation and mitigation perspective. And then to use those resources really to target the most effective high-impact interventions, which we keep now referring to as the best buys for climate and health. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about this in today's panel. The fourth element of, or objective of this working group is really to focus on capacity and how that we can increase capacity at regional, national, as well as subnational level. And finally, how do we ensure that this approach is coordinated with the right communication approaches with stakeholders. Next slide, please. So the Development Bank's working group has been established for nearly 6 months now, a little bit less than 6 months. So we established that in July of this year. And we're extremely happy that it has been recognized within the ministerial declaration that came in COP28. The efforts of the development banks have been already picked up by our partners and is reflected in that ministerial declaration. But I want to take a moment, and then I'm going to go to the panel by just saying that the joint approach that we're coming up with, which is going to be the focus of today's discussion, is along 6 main lines, as you can see on this slide. The first one is actually trying to define what we mean by climate and health investments. And it's going to be extremely critical for us to be able to unpack what that means. How do we define those investments? The second in our approach is coming in really focusing on the vulnerabilities at regional, country, and national as well as subnational levels. And from there, how can we build capacities at a country level to be able really to address the gaps and needs within those countries. And once again, re-emphasizing the point that this is also about scaling up cost-effective solutions. So the approach itself is coming in really to get us to that level where we're able to put that attention, the needed attention on these cost-effective solutions for which financing would be made available. And then obviously it ends with a focus on results and accountability. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce my my panelists. Thank you so much for bearing with me for this introduction. And I'm joined by 3 distinguished panelists from representing different institutions. We have Ferdinando Regalia, who's the Social Sector Manager at the Inter-American Development Bank. Welcome, Ferdinando.
Thank you very much.
I have Laura Piovesan, who is the Director General at the European Investment Bank. And we're also joined by Eric Bergloff, who's the Chief Economist at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. A warm welcome to all 3 of you. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on live stream. I understand that other multilateral development banks as well as development banks are online. I just want to take a moment also to acknowledge that KfW is online, and we're very grateful that they're following with us. And of course, if there are any questions at the end, that they could come in with that. So, Ferdinando, let me start with you for our first discussion today. So, we understand, obviously, that the Inter-American Development Bank is very much a core partner as part of the Development Bank's working group. And as we were talking about the joint approach, the first point that we started off with is really trying to understand how do we define these climate and health investments. So what we're interested in hearing from you today is, in your view, the approach that the development banks are adopting to understanding, climate and health investments and understanding country vulnerabilities, including, obviously, this context at a country level. Can you tell us a little bit more on the approach that the development banks are taking into this regard and your experience that you'd like to share from the LAC region? Over to you.
First, thanks very much for this invitation and for the work we have done in the last 6 months. Really a pleasure to be here. Our core principle in Inter-American Development Bank is really partner with countries and with partners to work enhancing the development of our region, and climate health investment is part of this. We really welcome the joint roadmap, and particularly the 3 big pillars aiming at addressing supporting countries to address the direct health impacts of climate change, ensure more resilient and more sustainable health system, and also promote co-benefits of cross-sectoral investment. And I'm going to try to make 3 points related to these areas of work, where the IDB has some positioning, but I consider this just a starting point. And today we need to celebrate because health is part of the COP, but with a lot of focus comes also a lot of accountability. So let me talk, for example, about the work the IDB has done in the last few years to increase the resiliency and sustainability of health systems. So we have a growing portfolio, for example, of health and digital infrastructure. Each of these projects go through a very thorough sustainability and resiliency analysis. For example, our portfolio in hospital has grown in the last years. We work from El Salvador to Paraguay to Bolivia to Peru to Brazil. And what we need to ensure that this facility and the teams can operate under extreme weather conditions, whether there are prolonged drought with absence of water, whether there is rainfall and caused by hurricanes in the Caribbean. And also, we have a dedicated team that work on this project, trying to reduce the carbon footprint of this investment. Looking, for example, at energy efficiency measure, energy efficiency equipment, optimization of operations, and also digital transformation as a big part in this effort. The second point I would like to make, and I think MDBs and partners are particularly well placed for that, is a co-benefit of investment in different sectors to improve health outcomes. Let me give you an example. For example, currently, we are working in Guyana, in the hinterlands, where there's a high concentration on indigenous population, in a very participative process to improve infrastructure and digital services of the health system, but also at the same time intervening with a public program of housing with a system of water collection to prepare for what is expected extended periods of drought. And the third point I want to make is that despite progress in the region, in the Latin American and Caribbean region, we are not fully prepared for this transition. Very few countries in the region, in our region, have developed, for example, adaptation national plans. And this is an area of focus where we all should join forces, together, for example, with the Pan American Health Organization, to really assess, as you were mentioning before, risks, capacity gaps at national and sub-national level, participatory. There's a lot of knowledge in the community, but also move towards the development of plans that are operational, that are costed. I think this is a lever that we miss in order to mobilize more resources and more financing for this. So let me finish my intervention, again, reaffirming our commitment, our joint commitment to work with the working group and scale up investment at the same time as evidence for this area.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if the microphone is working. Oh, Ferdinando, thanks so much for highlighting these three integral parts of what you're doing in the IADB. And in fact, it resonates quite strongly as well with our general thinking that the focus of investments has to be on adaptation and resilience as one category, on mitigation as a second category, and then looking at the third category on the climate co-benefits. As soon as you started talking about what we're doing in other sectors and how that impacts on health, it's the way that obviously in the, in the global health community that we've been thinking about how we scale up investments. So I'm very happy to hear of the sustainability and resilience assessments that you were referring to. And in fact, it also speaks to the kind of work that we're also doing at the World Bank with vulnerability assessments, the carbon footprint analysis that you're also going into, and of course the co-benefits in that regard. So thank you so much for sharing those views. Laura, I'm going to get to you after I ask Eric one question, because I think that your question is going to be very much related to Eric's response, I guess. So Eric, you've heard me when I was talking at the beginning, refer a few times to the fact that we need to be moving towards cost-effective solutions, high-impact solutions. Now, as the chief economist of the AIIB, can you share with us your thinking on what that means? to be coming up with cost-effective solutions for climate and health action. How do we actually move in that direction? And what sort of work have you been doing in AIB to bring us to that level of understanding as well?
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting us to this panel. I should say we are a newcomer, as you know, to this. And actually, before COVID, we did nothing in health. In COVID, we ended up doing almost everything in health. And I arrived in the middle of COVID to AIB, and the first thing I was asked to do was to help lead a process to build a health business at AIB. So, we have since then established a health or social infrastructure department and focusing mainly on health. And of course, in that process, building up this collaboration between the MDBs was absolutely essential. I was worried that, here we're coming, a newcomer, we're going to crowd out others and so on. There was absolutely opposite response. This is an area where it's so completely underinvested, and anyone who can come in and contribute. And both the World Bank and the ADB, fantastic collaboration. And I had gone through a similar journey at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and we never really built at that time a health business. I think AIB is now underway of trying to do this. And we have a few things, and it goes to your question, I guess. So one thing that we think is extremely important is the whole concept of One Health, where you link human health, animal health, and environmental, climate, ecosystem health. And I think coming from that perspective, the issue is how do we have the most impact on health and climate together. I think taking that perspective is extremely important. And related to that, of course, and to these commitments that we have made as institutions, working with science and being very close to science. And for me as an economist, it's a challenge, but it's also incredibly stimulating because we need to understand these interactions. We need to understand much better. I think on the health side, I think obviously there are things that we have learned from COVID, for example, but also, but I think what we are more challenged is on the nature and I think climate science we have taken on board, but the nature science, I still think we are really struggling, all of us, to fully understand these interactions. And so coming to this from a One Health perspective, taking science seriously, and taking data, measuring impact, documenting this. I think we, in a way, we had a natural experiment from COVID. We learned a lot. We learned that primary health care is extremely important, that, as you were mentioning, these distributional impact, that these poor people were so much more affected by this, elderly people were more affected. The same is true for climate, of course. Warming is affecting poor people much more, elderly people much more, and so on. So I think having this understanding of the impact and then targeting that based on science, I think to me that's the key.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to push you a little bit more, though, yeah? Because I think we still want to get down to the understanding of what it means to us as a community to be moving towards identifying those most cost-effective interventions. So One Health is clearly an important intervention, yeah? But if we were to put in place a mechanism by which we would evaluate those interventions, how would you see that?
No, I completely accept that this is a huge challenge. It's a very complex interactions, and I think in climate we have an agreement on more or less on how to measure things. We have the agreement on the metrics, and that has led to development of financial instruments and so on. When we come to nature, we are, I wouldn't say we are nowhere, but we are very far away from having agreed on a single metric, on being able to establish markets for biocredits, for example. All that is going to be absolutely essential if we want to make progress on this agenda. We actually launched a report yesterday on nature as infrastructure. The purpose of that is very much to say that nature is the most precious infrastructure we have, and we need to think about how can we value nature properly, how can we, based on those valuations, issue financial instruments and get these investments going. And when we look at infrastructure investments, we should first look at what can nature deliver before we go into gray infrastructure. If we want to have flood barriers, if we want to have cleaning of water, if we want to prevent tidal waves, whatever, we should first look what can nature deliver. And that, again, we need to have that very close collaboration with science and understanding what is the full potential of nature to deliver.
Excellent, amazing. I think that this is a very strong reminder to all of us that when we're going through this exercise, it has to be embedded in scientific evidence. Yeah. We have to have the evidence that shows us where we're going and how we're getting there. And I think that you've used a number of words, Eric, in your description. The metrics, for example, that we need to consider for that are going to be extremely important. Yeah. And I think this is going to be a big part, obviously, of what the development banks do together to be able to move towards a way of identifying these most cost-effective interventions. The other important point that I think also came out in your intervention, Eric, is the fact that this is not just about health. This is also about looking outside the health sector, and I think we started off with that at the beginning. So I'm very happy that you brought up the One Health agenda, and I'm sure that my colleague from the Agence Française de Développement is going to be very happy to hear this. She's been a strong advocate for the One Health agenda, and probably is going to be bringing it up in the next theme. So Laura, can I go over to you now? So we've heard a lot now about the evidence that needs to come into play to scaling up climate and health action. What I'd like to understand from your perspective, from EIB, what is it that you're doing to merge climate and health financing, particularly when it comes to using evidence-based approaches in that regard? Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Tamar. And indeed, let me start by joining you and on saying how happy I am that finally we have a health day at the climate conference. So as the EU Bank over climate, we have been attending COP for many years, contributing to COP for many years, and of course financing, deploying green finance and climate investments for a long time. And for a long time, we have advocated to bring on this scenario also the topic of health, because it's clear the impact climate has on health, but also on the health systems. Now, this impact is clear, but also needs to be clearly measured. Needs to be measured as everything which concerns climate in a way that is, as you mentioned, evidence-based, and it's with an approach which is shared. So amongst MDB, we do measure together our climate financial flows, and it is important to find the right metrics and the right approach to share and to be able to communicate consistently around what we are doing to support the nexus of climate and health. So another reason why an evidence-based and a data-based approach is important is because we are not talking about past events. We cannot base our assessments of the impacts on past events. We need to base them on sound, robust data which allow us to forecast what's going to happen in the future. And why do we need such an evidence-based approach? Well, first of all, it is important in order to assess the impact of climate on our health systems in terms, for example, of healthcare facilities. And we are looking at this both from the point of view of mitigation and of the point of view of adaptation. So when supporting new investments in healthcare, and at the EIB in the last 5 years, we have been investing some 20 billion euros in investments in health. So when investment in healthcare facilities, you need to both design these facilities to take into account the future impact of the climate crisis on the demand on the facilities on one hand. You have to design them in a way that they are energy efficient, so they do not add to the climate crisis. And to do that, we base ourselves on the European taxonomy. And third, you need to take into account the future climate risk and build them resilient, looking at the impact of floods, the water, heat waves, all very important elements. A second area where you need to have data, sound data, and an evidence-based approach is when looking at the drivers for innovations to address this climate and health crisis. So the EIB has been financing research and development, for example, and has been financing new pharmaceuticals. And here, again, you need to understand clearly what are the drivers when it comes to health risks like antimicrobial resistance, increased average temperature, increased the spread of microbes, but they also, and also linked to these, the antibiotics used on animal nutrition. So the bank has been working both on antimicrobial resistance developments for human health, but also on vaccines for the animals. Another area is how do we finance? And the importance of partnerships amongst MDBs, partnership with UN agencies, private and public partnerships. And let me mention, for example, role of vaccines again, and in this case, not the development of vaccines, but the deployment. And I'm thinking of the role of a public-private partnership like Gavi has had in deploying 1 billion of vaccines for children across the world. And this, again, is addressing the climate crisis. So in conclusion, we need the data, sound data, we need a common approach. And for this, we do value very much having been able to work with all the MDBs and other partners in developing this joint approach, and we support very much the joint declaration. And they're looking forward to continue to work with everyone and learn on the different experiences and approach. I think what you mentioned before, and Fernando mentioned, the importance of measuring the co-benefits. I think this is really where we need to focus also next.
Laura, excellent. Thanks so much. I'm going to try and make my voice a little bit louder than our next door neighbors. And please, for my panelists, feel free to do the same. So I think that the points that you've mentioned really speak to the core of why we have the Development Bank's Working Group. How is it that we come together to ensure that we're harmonizing our approaches, be it in financial in terms and financial flows? And in fact, it reminds me to bring, to the forefront that we already have a joint multilateral development banks methodology for climate health, well, not climate health, but for climate accounting. So it's obviously good to take account of the fact that we already have such measures that we can further build on. I think the other point that we're hearing loud and clear from our panelists is evidence. We need to ensure that we're moving with an evidence-based approach. And we need to ensure that obviously with this evidence-based approach that we're able to scale up climate and health investments and action. And I'm extremely happy that you underlined the role of the private sector. I'm looking at Farid, who is our Global Director for Health and Education at the IFC. And we are putting a lot of emphasis now on making sure that we're bringing private sector into the discussion, at the forefront of climate and health action. So I'm very happy that you brought these points through. So I'm just going to ask one very quick question to each of you before we move on to our second theme. And I will start again with you, Ferdinando. So I want to start from where we ended, partnerships. And my understanding is that there was, in August of this year, the World Bank and the IDB, we had announced a groundbreaking partnership together. And this was to drive results for climate vulnerable populations in LAC. Now, one objective of this partnership, based on our understanding of the partnership, and I'd love to hear more from you, was really on how do we increase resilience towards climatic shocks. And we would like to understand from you, how do you foresee this partnership being operationalized in the health sector?
To shout a little bit.
Yes.
So the MOU actually was signed, but it's just the starting point. We are working to really implement strong disaster financing strategy, for example, for the Caribbean. So my point is the following. If we manage to mobilize more resources, then in order for those resources to be spent effectively, countries need to have very solid plans. And that involves a multi-sector effort, including health. As my president says, there is space for everyone. And what has been interesting from August is after the signature, which was focused on financial instruments for the Caribbean, for the Amazon, digital transformation and digital connectivity and education, even the health sector actually start to work even more together than we used to be. Actually, today, 4th of December in Uruguay, will be launched the Alliance for Primary Healthcare in Latin America and the Caribbean with PAHO, with the World Bank, and with the IDB. So I think there is a good starting framework to increase our collaboration with you and with the other partners working on the region. Thanks.
Excellent. Very happy to hear yet again, and I think the message is being repeated, the focus on multi-sectorality. So this again is not, it's not a sectoral silo, but we have to be working across sectors and bringing in some of the global public goods as well into this space, like the digital agenda that you've been referring to is great. And congratulations to all of us on the Alliance for Primary Healthcare. Thank you for bringing that up. Laura, one last question to you. So from what we've heard so far, including the examples that you've provided also from the work that you're doing in EIB and scaling up climate and health finance, going beyond financial needs, what other needs do you see out there based on your experience with climate health financing?
So you just mentioned partnership, and I think partnership is a very powerful tool. As Eric was also saying, I mean, there is no need to compete, or, there is such a need for investments. So working together is first, but working together on what? I also see the importance of building the capacity. So how we need to learn how to climate-proof our investments, but also future-proof our investments. I think it is important to raise this awareness of the link between climate and health and what does it mean concretely with the professionals, so that work every day in health, and at the same time also with the governments, with the multilateral organization, in a way that we have a clear message on this increased impact of climate and how it can be seen in health, how does it impact health. So I would say this capacity building and awareness raising, and having a health day again at COP is the first step in the right direction, and I hope next year it will be even more prominently featured.
Indeed, and actually, I just want to pick very quickly up on one of the points that you mentioned, which is about the competition. Indeed, this is not us competing. I mean, this is not the competition that should exist within the health sector, so we need to be mindful of the fact that there are a lot of pressing priorities, and we need to be able to see how we can bring those together. I mean, I see my colleague Priya in the audience, you know, with the pandemic fund, and what we're trying to do is make sure that whatever we're doing in climate also takes into account pandemic preparedness and response. So this is about ensuring that we're bringing these different sort of priorities without making them competing priorities, but bringing them under one umbrella, under one roof, and we can see how we can move forward on that. So thanks for highlighting that. So let me get now to you, Eric, with a final question. So we're at COP28, and I'm interested in what you think, perhaps maybe the next steps that we need to take as development banks moving into the next COP. What do you think we're still missing? What is it we need to do more? And please be critical.
Well, it's, as I said, we are very much a newcomer, and we are still learning. We are still enjoying, you know, some very fruitful collaborations for us. We was privileged enough to be part of the first round of financing of the pandemic fund in Cambodia, zoonotic surveillance, and you know, very nice collaboration with the several others, the ADB and the World Bank, and so I think this kind of, you know, working together, co-financing in specific projects. We have another very ambitious project in Indonesia, working with World Bank, ADB, Islamic Development Bank. You know, really profoundly, I think, trying to restructure the healthcare system. And there was, you know, when we were in the pandemic, when we were looking at these in financing vaccines, that was a very frustrating exercise, because, you know, very large ticket items that went to, and we had no capacity to really contribute to that. We were just putting in money, and you know, we were trying to get some conversation going around, should we use these very large ticket items to try to address some of the vulnerabilities that came out of the pandemic, or the pandemic illustrated. And I think that's the kind of things we are doing together now in Indonesia, and we are also working with OECD on looking at the economic implications of AMR across Asia, and looking at not only about the implications but also the effectiveness of several different measures, and trying to understand that. So this is also the kind of thing to build up common data sets. By the way, this report that I mentioned before today, this Nature's Infrastructure, we couldn't have done that report, or a large part of the report, without the collaboration of the Changing Wealth of Nations data of the World Bank. You know, so this is, I think, is to me, looking forward, you know, having concrete things we want to address. So AMR, you know, basic healthcare, working together, building common data sets, common metrics, as I said, and you know, that's for me the path forward. And I think, you know, again, this this project that we have under the pandemic fund, I think will be super interesting to follow. You know, how this collaboration works and how we can learn from that, because this is going to be absolutely critical when we develop the pandemic response going forward.
Stellar. I think Eric has defined everything that we need to do moving forward between now and next COP. And I think that definitely a lot of what he said resonates quite strongly with what we've been discussing in the global health community. The prioritization of themes is going to be important, and which themes to work on. We've heard One Health, you've spoken about AMR, and of course these are critical areas for us to think about. Moving forward, it's all obviously all about harmonizing approaches. Data is one of them, and obviously creating common databases is going to be extremely important for us to do. And I think the last point, perhaps, which is a nice segue to the second thematic discussion for today, is on the co-financing opportunities. I think the example of Indonesia is going to come up again. It's an excellent example to showcase how the development banks have come together to really scale up climate and health finance at a level that we've not seen before. So within the World Bank, we take a lot of pride in the Indonesia example. I mean, there are other, obviously, projects, but this one in particular, given the co-financing arrangement, is something to be proud of and to see how we can work together and further.
Could I say one thing? So we just to signal that we are not just talking here. We just hired our first One Health scientist in my team. So she starts in the beginning of February. So I think just this is an area that we really want to contribute in. And
Superb. So we're walking the talk. We need to do more, very clearly as it relates to working across sectors, ensuring that we're also able to increase the capacity within our own sector, and using evidence and data to inform our next steps. So with that, I'm going to thank my panelists. Thank you so much for joining today. This was the first theme of today's event. The second theme is going to be chaired by my colleague Agnès Sugat from the Agence Française de Développement. But I see there's a question from the gentleman here, so if I can pass the mic over to you.
So I'm very grateful hearing all your comments, and I've been 34 years in the private sector finance with global banks and asset management companies. And I see a lot of these commitments being made on each COP, and they are routed through multilateral or governmental agencies. But execution is lacking. There's a lot of bureaucracy, and by the time people disperse the funds, like I just spoke to Green Fund, the Green, GCF? Green Climate Fund, and they said, you need to go to Deutsche Bank or HSBC to do a credit check on you, and then they'll submit to us, and then we'll give the funding. I mean, it's just too laborious and bureaucratic in terms of getting things done. We've spent years in the private sector of raising funds, putting funds together. We've developed a fund where we will raise 20 years funding from the private sector up to $50 billion to put in retrofitting old buildings around the world. That reduces emissions by 40 to 80% within 2 years. Over the last 25 years, just 1% has been achieved globally on retrofitting. This is low-hanging fruit. We just need 100 million. The rest we will raise 50 billion from the private markets. But nobody's willing to understand and listen.
Thank you so much for this question. We will attempt to respond to this question. It's not, that straightforward, but we do have, as I mentioned, our global director from the IFC with us. So we'll try and tackle that question also on how to bring in more of the partnership with the private sector. But I'll move over to you, Agnès, and I'll once again thank my, my distinguished panelists here, and over to you, Agnès.
Very much, Dinesh. You're here? Yes. Thank you very much, Tamer. And so we're going to move to the second panel, and I'm inviting, thank you very much to all the panelists from the first session, and let me invite the panelists of the second session to talk about partnerships and the coalition of public development banks and multilateral development banks. So we have the Asian Development Bank with us, with Dinesh Arora, who is responsible for the climate and health agenda. We have with us also Fadia Sada, who is the Director for Human Development for the Middle East and North Africa at the World Bank. You're Farid, yeah. And with us, we also have Farid Fezoua, who is the Global Director for Health, Education and Services in the IFC, in the International Finance Corporation. So a little bit And last but not least, we have with us Boitumolo Mosako, who is the Chief Executive Officer of DBSA, the Development Bank of South Africa.
Are you the moderator? 5 guests, right?
So let's start this second panel, and I'm very pleased to start with the Asian Development Bank and with questions about what you are doing for this agenda on climate and health. You've been very involved recently in the discussions on climate and health with the G20, and we would like to know more, in fact, how the Asian Development Bank Group is really handling this question and how you approach the creation and identification of opportunities for co-investments in climate and health within these partnerships with public and multilateral development banks.
I think it's a journey which started about 1.5 years back with G20. We realized that people do talk about decarbonization with transport, with energy sector, but they haven't talked to anybody about health. Health was simply lost out in plain sight. And when we went into the literature, we did some studies, came up with a desk review. Health contributes 5.3% of all the carbon gases which produce in the world. It's about double of what shipping industry does. It's about 1.5 times what civil aviation industry does. People talk about shipping lines, oil leak in the seas and all, but nobody talks about health. And mind you, health is also the first responder. I was trying to gauge when did we start talking about climate and health, with health as a chief proponent for this. I came across 1989, there was a seminal article by Alexander Leaf in the New England Journal where he talked about climate and health and was a bit cynical. He said, well, the evidence is not there. Should we jump into action or should we just wait to have more evidence? And I guess we all believed the second part. And for the last 35 years, we didn't have that much of action or momentum being built up, which is being seen in the last few years. And that's kudos, I think, to the whole medical health community of bringing this. And today, we are sitting here for COP28 on the Health Day is one of the achievements for this. But I still say it's a beginning. As far as Asian Development Bank is concerned, we worked with the G20 India Sherpa and the Ministry of Health and convinced them to bring health and climate as one of the major agenda items in the health working group. So we evolved 5 main principles through which MDBs and other development banks could come together. The first was on the prioritizing the resilient health systems. We can't leave aside, just go for mitigation without thinking about adaptation for the damage already being done. We have seen floods in Pakistan, how when the public health systems get demoralized, demolished, you'd have the simple diarrheal diseases become life-threatening. The second principle went on to decarbonizing the health systems. The third went into decarbonizing supply chains. Fourth was of what we are talking right now of co-investment, novel financing, incubation of ideas. And the fifth, overarching One Health principle. So ADB, with help of G20, has today launched actually the Climate and Health Initiative. And we had about a galaxy of ministers representing today in the morning in the presidency, which focuses and strategizes a platform for climate and health financing across MDBs, across different bodies,
with WHO attached principles in mind to have a common framework for the same. We look forward to everyone's participation. We believe this space is huge and we all need to work synergistically. I'll just give you one example. We were talking to a country and we were talking about climate and health. The question they asked is, are you substituting UHC money for climate and health? Should climate and health action be prioritized above UHC? And our reply was, no, it has to be in addition, and it's equally important to have a long-term vision what the country needs to achieve. I'm sure, Anes, you know the country, and we may be perhaps working together very soon on that country. But thank you so much for the intervention. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very important message is first that the G20 is taking this issue on board, and it's going to continue with Brazil, the Brazil leadership on the next leadership on the G20. Very key message also that it's not one additional global health agenda, but it's really about a reset of investments in health systems. And it's not about mitigation versus adaptation. It's not zero emission clinics versus resilient hospitals. It's about how to invest differently in health. And I also note the very important focus on One Health. Sometimes it feels like there is a One Health conversation somewhere and there's a climate and health conversation somewhere, but when it hits the ground at country level, these are the very same institutions, right? Integrated surveillance, public health programs, animal health programs, environmental health programs, and so on. Let me actually go directly, yes.
Part of the pandemic preparedness.
Pandemic preparedness and climate and health is basically the same agenda when it comes to investments at the country level. It's about investing in public health institutions and in resilient supply of services, resilient health systems. Actually, talking about the country level, let me go to South Africa and ask the view of Boitumelo. And our understanding, so DBSA is part of a large coalition of public development banks, which is Finance in Common. And you are part of this consortium of development banks that invest jointly. And right now in South Africa, there is this Just Energy Transition Program in which the government of South Africa will invest more than 8 billion in the energy transition towards the phasing out of coal and going into green investments. Our understanding that these more than 2 trillion, there is more than 2 trillion investments per year in this consortium of public development banks. This is what public development banks invest every year, more than 2 trillion. So the question is, how can we reorient that funding, the funding that you and other public development banks provide every year, towards more investments into the climate agenda, and particularly the climate and health agenda? Can you tell us about the role of DBSA, of public development banks, and what can be done to channel more resources to this agenda?
Thank you for that question, and greetings to the panel members and everyone who's here as well. You know, the way we look at it as a development finance institution, and also as part of a community of public development banks, it's not either or, right? It's not helping or assisting the governments that we serve to achieve NDCs. It's also about closing the SDG gap. And those two elements, it's not either or. There has to be a convergence of how we then do that. You cannot talk about climate without health being at the center of it. And the reason I say that is, the reason we do all of this is because of people. It's about protecting people, the well-being of people. The way we see it as a development bank is we operate in key network sectors. Our sectors are energy, water, transport, ICT, that's digital infrastructure, health, education, and human settlements. All of those elements, touch on people. And all of those elements are equally impacted by climate. Now, what are we doing as the development bank around that is that firstly, when it comes to the linkages, because we play along the infrastructure value chain, we plan infrastructure, we prepare infrastructure, we fund infrastructure, we implement, even though we are a bank, we have a division within the bank that implements infrastructure projects. This includes the building of hospitals as well. We also maintain. So we are in network industries that also provide access. So when it comes to climate finance, we are then leveraging the partnerships that we have. Firstly, in terms of using the various instruments that are provided within the climate space. That is your green bonds, that's your social bonds, access to concessional funding, leveraging of green climate facilities as well. So we use our institutional strength and our brand as a development to mobilize funding specifically for infrastructure projects. To address water, we currently have a special program within the bank for water. Water is life. Water is a key part of everybody's well-being. And we have to ensure that as a development finance institution, we enhance water security in the region where we operate. We are of the view that a programmatic approach to infrastructure allows for acceleration. We don't do project by project, but we do programs. And when we follow that approach as well, it enables us to also provide an investment platform that then mobilizes private sector funds. Because remember, private sector is not about standing back. Health is not just for the fiscus or for the governments to take care of. It is all our responsibility, both the private and the public sector as well. So it's important for us as a development bank to create these investment platforms so we can mobilize private sector into the social infrastructure that addresses water, that addresses energy and transport as well. The second thing that I'd like to raise around this is the policy environment as well. When it comes to as development finance institutions, especially local institutions, having to work with our governments to actually drive the right policy and regulatory frameworks so that we can be able to enhance participation both by the development finance institutions and the development and the private sector as well, to enable investment in infrastructure that enhances health. We have developed a green on the building side. We have developed a green building framework as an institution, because it is important for us to build climate resilient infrastructure. And we are working, and the earlier speaker spoke about the science. We are also working with academia as well on climate mapping and also on developing early warning systems, so that when we plan our infrastructure going forward, and this is on the mitigation side, we then ensure that the investments we make are climate resilient. On the adaptation side, the investments we make ensure that the element of resiliency comes in. So my last point is, it's a collaborative effort. It's a collaborative effort between the public development banks, the MDBs, its governments, its civil society, its academia, and it is the private sector as well. This is all at the center. This should be at the center of our concerns. And I would like to commend, COP28 for actually, bringing this topic to life, because it is something that we should all be conscious of in our daily investment activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is incredible how you give a touch of reality about how investments really land at country level, and you insist on this multi-sectorality, because when you invest in water, you're investing in water systems that produce health because of clean water, because of sanitation. And you mentioned, we know also that access to energy and clean energy contributes to health, including reducing pollution. So this multi-sectoral aspect is certainly something that needs to be reiterated as we move on to the climate and health agenda. It goes beyond what the international community has done in the past in focusing on investment in UHC health services, but going more into systems for health, right? This is what I understand. And bringing everybody together is also mobilizing that financing capacity. So this 2.5 trillion that public development banks altogether invest every year in public policies and public investments. You mentioned also domestic financing, right? Just the financing of health is 9 trillion per year that can be retooled towards climate resilient investments. And of course, we have the issue of fossil fuel subsidies, but that's another discussion. Shall I move to Farid Fezua and ask you about the needs that we have for agility, speed, and innovation in those investments. And for that, the private sector will be a key partner in climate enhanced. The just mere size of the needed investments to invest in the just energy transition, not to oppose the environmental goals to the social goals, which is incredibly important if we want social consensus towards these investments. What is your experience of how we can create more opportunities for private sector investments in the climate and health space? And what do we need to consider what do we need to consider to make sure the private sector has the needed capacity to make those investments, particularly in the vulnerable countries and the vulnerable communities? So,
no, thanks, Agnès. First of all, I'd like to join my voice to say that today is a historic day, and yesterday actually, through the declaration that we've seen and the focus that we're having, in the intersection of health and climate. It seems obvious, but for 27 years we kind of missed an obvious point of linking that. And I would say probably the COVID pandemic kind of, reminded us that we needed to link those two, health and climate. I took this position coming from the private sector in IFC a year and a half ago. And that was, summer of 2022. And we were 2 years in the COVID pandemic. And I think what the pandemic showed us is that there is still today a lot of broken kind of connectors and gaps into our health value chain. So, and still today, the availability of both efficient health delivery and health supply is still missing in a lot of parts of the emerging countries. If you look at Africa today, only 30% of the health facilities have the necessary equipment to conduct basic diagnostic in region. And the worst availability comes at the level of primary care. So if you combine very low availability of health supply and services and primary care, this is where the kind of gaps in delivering proper resilience with regards to all the climate challenges ahead of us is quite daunting. So I think we need to, the good news is that during COVID and after COVID, the community came together, including that group of the IDBs. I mean, the Pandemic Fund is one key reminder of what was done very, very fast, after the pandemic. We agreed among a few months back, 3 months back, on bringing together the MDBs and the G7 MDBs working on surge financing and medical countermeasures to really make preparedness a reality when it hits. So I think we need to demonstrate the same level of urgency for the topic that concerns us today, which is climate and health. And I would like to just, touch on what we're looking at doing, and particularly involving the private sector. The private sector is an important player in that agenda. If you look at the emerging countries between Africa and Asia, the private sector still delivers between 50 to 80% of the health services, and that's a reality, that's a fact. It's part of so it is a major actor in health delivery of services, but it's also a major actor, and we've seen that during the pandemic, of the overall global supply chain, from product development all the way to downstream health supplies. So I would touch on the 3 elements of what this working group convened on. One is adaptation. And on adaptation, the same thing is true. There is a direct link in terms of localizing the capabilities, in terms of manufacturing of health supplies. And people in this room and a lot of partners, including the IFC, have been working on involving the private sector to invest into manufacturing in emerging markets, to have the availability where it's needed the most, and convening a lot of the private sector investors into that venture. And I have to say, if you look at a position, if we take a continent like Africa that had hardly any vaccine production, even project at the time, today we're sitting with 5 active, investments and co-investment between the private sector and the public sector in terms of producing vaccines. So I think that's something we need to double down on adaptation. The second one is, increase the mitigation actions, and reduction of emission is a big topic. If you think that particularly the pharmaceutical industry accounts for 5% of the total emission, we have a role to play in making sure that we reduce that emission and we act on mitigation. I would say we have an additional opportunity, because as we're building more pharmaceutical vaccine manufacturing in emerging market, we have the ability from day one to green those infrastructure and work closer with the investors to avoid the situations we have in the global north. So I think that's also an area for us to focus on. From an IFC standpoint, since 2020, 28 medical facilities within our own portfolio have either announced participation or is in the process of adhering to our EDGE green building effort and resource efficiency effort. And we're very proud to drive that forward. And we've just approved a new global pharma resource efficiency program. So when we were talking about beyond financing, I think there was a question for the panel before that. What do you do in terms of adding to the dollars you're investing is all the advisory support that we need to bring as multilateral development banks, but other partners, in order to instill that ability to green the buildings and the infrastructure. And the last but not least is really the co-benefits and all the climate-related actions across the other industries that have health-related co-benefits. And here again, within the overall World Bank Group Climate Change Action Plan, IFC has been really focusing on the overall ecosystem of energy, adaptation, transition, cities, transport, manufacturing. If you look at our portfolio, and we're having within that effort a new look at our existing portfolio of other activities, manufacturing and infra particularly, And 81% of our investment in manufacturing include today a decarbonization element. I would say I also lead the commercial property business in IFC. And today, if I look at our activities, we add every year about 1.5 billion in commercial property. 100% of that is, has a climate related angle. And we try to incentivize our customers to adopt responsible investment and practices in this regard. So all in all, I would say we have an opportunity to drive that agenda. I think the COVID crisis kind of emphasized the need to build resilience and prepare for the next crisis. In doing that, we're already preparing for the climate and health agenda. If you're building localized capabilities and localized incentives for the industry to invest. The last point I would touch is on public-private partnership and the ability of bringing, the public sector, the effort of the development banks to really de-risk a certain number of mechanisms to leverage and induce the private capital to invest. And the Indonesia example that was mentioned before is a good one, because for the first time at scale in one country that is 300 million people, MDBs came together, put a $4 billion investment mechanism to transform the health system of the country, all the way from primary to tertiary, which I think, from my recollection, is probably the first time it's done. And we've been able, through the collaboration, IFC and the World Bank, the ADB, and the Islamic Development Bank, to bring the private sector, capital, and investors into that process. So there is an ability to, crowdsource even more funding from the private sector if we just leverage the ability, which I don't think we've done efficiently in the past, from multilateral banks to really use the risking mechanism to crowdsource more capital and capabilities.
Yes, and we've seen that, thank you. We've seen that recently in de-risking investments in production of medical products.
Right.
Post-pandemic in different African countries to foster sovereignty in the production and autonomy of countries and region in production of medical products. So the same kind of mechanism could be used.
Could apply.
And I think, again, your message is incredibly consistent in saying that there is already massive investments in health that are happening that can be retooled or reshaped by providing an enabling environment. And part of these investments is private. I mean, 40% of health spending globally is private. And in some countries, it's more than 50%, as you said. There are really mechanisms which are regulatory, let's say accreditation, which can be financial incentives in the way we invest in providing technical assistance and incentives to invest in decarbonized and climate resilient programs. And that is really, I think, the message that this group is really carrying, that it's not about making small additional investment as much as rethinking the full range of current investments that contribute to health, not only in health services, but in water services, in education services, in infrastructure, and rethinking that and resetting the way we think about those investments so that they contribute to this agenda of both better health, more equity also, protecting the poor, as you say, it's about the people, and also contributing to climate mitigation and resilience. Let me move now to Fadia Sarah. And Fadia, with your experience as a Director for Human Development in North Africa and the Middle East and previously in other regions, you're very aware of the multi-sectoral questions, and particularly being responsible for social protection and the need for these multi-sectoral synergies. So given that this is probably the most multi-sectoral issue that we are facing now, this sort of environment poly-crisis, what do you see are opportunities for cross-sectoral collaboration, whether it is in the space of One Health or the space maybe of adaptive social protection? So how do you bring that about in the World Bank?
Thank you. I think we should add noise to the issue of climate because this has been very hard to listen to 2 sessions. But let me go back to your question. Clearly, the issue is multi-sectoral. That's what we have been talking about for the whole few days, and actually for 27 years. But now we've added health finally. And health by nature is multi-sectoral without even thinking about climate. When you add climate dimension, it actually, having to cover education, social protection, jobs, and health is an interesting, at least small part of the multi-sectorality, where we see a lot of the just transition, for instance, that's becoming very big. And with bringing the lessons from COVID, how much we need to adapt. And what has been interesting is how much people look, even in just transition, too narrowly. We think some people losing their job, let's find them some alternative and compensate. That's not just transition. Just transition is about changing, really, it's about helping people adapt to a whole new life. It's about society, it's about behavior, it's about dignity, about pride, about your job, your status in community. So even one small aspect is so complex and important to look at it from their perspective, which is why multi-sectorality is important. But education as well, you can give examples, but it goes beyond. I mean, water, we talked about many other aspects. You have the infrastructure components. All of it contributes to both health and climate, and there's a lot of intersection. It's a dilemma that I think at least there has been an attempt to find an analytic tool to deal with it, and that's what we call at the World Bank CCDR. For those who are not familiar with our many acronyms, it's a Country Climate Development Report. And again, it is a tool to try and look at all the sectors in a country and come up with the right actions, whether on adaptation or mitigation. What's nice is it brings the team of all sectors together. But I'll be very honest, the first set of experience, it brought the team, but the depth was not always there. And that's actually not surprising if you reflect on it, because our teams were not trained to think, even putting a health person on the team and education didn't mean that the person knew about climate and health. Actually, the first report I did in my previous job when I was in Europe in response to the EU Green Deal, I basically asked the team to do it, and I brought people to do training. It wasn't as glossy a report as I could have hired professionals to do it, but it was an investment in our capacity, because it's important for all of us who work on health to become conversant in climate, and also for those in climate to be aware of the health impacts. So I think that's really part of the institutional readiness for all of us to deal with this. You brought One Health, of course, I'm not surprised. And One Health is one thing that we keep mentioning and we don't take it seriously. I mean, I worked on SARS, for those that dates me perhaps. But from there onwards, it has been a big issue. And part of the challenge for One Health is not that the concept is so foreign. First, you have to bring it on, but also that it's complex. So we need to separate between the conceptualization of One Health and the right entry point to start building One Health. Recently in Central Asia, we started with something on surveillance, because you need the data systems to talk to each other. You need the early warning systems to talk to each other. You can build also some of the training for doctors, for nurses. You have to build that lingo into the DNA of the system. And then it doesn't mean every project has to cover everything from A to Z. They sink under their own weight otherwise. But it means complementarity and working with it and having a vision for institutional readiness. We can start to address this. Institutions like FDA and the US, there is many countries that could use something like that, that looks at standards, at quality. That makes a lot of sense. And finally, on incentives for us to do all of this. Actually, the team put something that I thought was interesting in my talking points to prepare for this, which is they were thinking, why not what you measure matters? So we always look at climate co-benefits in health. Why not look at health co-benefits in climate? Because maybe if we start looking at that, we can advance the agenda. So I thought that was an intriguing idea. Now they have to find out how to do it. But with that, I think it is complex. But if you conceptualize right, you can always find the right implementation modality, and that's something we're very keen to do.
Thank you very much, Fadia. I think this is actually quite interesting, starting by your last point about the health co-benefits of climate investments, because ultimately, if we think as human societies, what we are aiming at is the health of people. That's the ultimate goals beyond, because some people have said, the planet's going to survive, whatever. The question is whether humans are going to survive on that planet. So that's really something that I think we should really take on board. As and this question that you mentioned, that it was already there in health, this multi-sectoral investment, but we've not quite been successful at that. And that's yet again the opportunity to look at systems for health. How do we invest in the different fundamental investments that are needed to produce health outcomes? And that have this sort of broad view. That includes One Health. And when you mention FDA, then that's where we see also the link with what the Pandemic Fund is doing, that it is about investing in public health institutions, in One Health programs, in surveillance, in regulation.
Public health laboratories.
Public health laboratories. It's really going back to investments in common goods for health, in the commons for health. It's about public health. And in many ways, this is what we already discovered in the 19th century, whether it's John Snow or Pasteur, that we unfortunately need to rethink because we have a completely different ecosystem that is changing and is presenting to us new challenges. I think we're reaching the end of this session. So I'll thank you very, very much, and I'll pass on to Tamer for him to conclude. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so extremely rich discussion, a lot of great inputs that we've received from all our panelists. Just wanted to first of all thank our panelists for the insights and what they've shared with us today. And perhaps just to leave you with some very brief takeaway messages from today's discussion. I think the first main message that is coming out is that the impact obviously of the climate crisis on health is undeniable. We understand it in terms of burden of disease, but we also understand it in terms of the impacts on people's lives, livelihoods, and the kind of economic impacts that would be pushing people into extreme poverty. The second point is that it's very clear that as development banks, both multilateral as well as public development banks, that we have come together to ensure that we really are maximizing climate health finance and taking this to a level that would be of scale to match the needs at a country level. So I was also pleasantly, happy to note, what you were talking about, the role of the public development banks in this space and the kind of financing that you would bring into this. The third thing is all about evidence. So we've heard a lot today that evidence has to be at the heart of everything that we're doing, and it's what really is going to be driving our investments and scale up of action. And then the next point is in terms of capacity. We've heard a lot about the need to be able to increase capacity at a global, regional, national, as well as subnational level. And all of that's been well defined in the joint roadmap that the development banks have developed. We will be launching the roadmap early in the year together with a co-investment framework that goes side by side with it. So with that, I thank you once again for joining us, and I guess I'm going to do the strangest thing. I'm going to introduce myself at the very end of the session. My name is Tamer Rabi, and I'm the Global Program Lead for Climate and Health, and this was the Joint Development Banks Working Group for Climate and Health Finance. Thank you very much again.